If you're not familiar with the rule of thirds and how this technique can help you get great composition in your photos and videos, stay tuned. By the end of this video, you'll have a good understanding of what the rule of thirds is, why it's even a rule, and how to use it to improve the look of your photos and videos. So let's get started. Maybe you've heard of the term rule of thirds, but you're not really sure exactly what it is and how it's supposed to help you get better photos and videos. So first of all, let's look at what it is. The rule of thirds is basically like an imaginary grid that you apply to your image through the camera lens, and it helps you to know where to put the subject so that the image looks pleasing to the eye. Now, I say imaginary, but actually some cameras do have the function to be able to show the grid on the screen or in the viewfinder so that you don't have to imagine it, you can actually see it there as you are placing your subject. Next, why is it a rule? Artists back in the day used to paint their subject right in the center of the image, but then they started to move off to the side a little bit and to use the rule of thirds in order to allow for more of a dynamic interaction with the background. So if your subject is in the center of the image, then it's kind of static, whereas if you put the subject slightly to the side or slightly higher or lower, then it allows the eye to take in more of the background as well as the subject, which gives it a little bit more dynamics. This makes it a lot more appealing to the eye, but you do need to be careful that the background isn't too distracting because you don't want that to take away from the focus on your subject. So how do we use the rule of thirds? The rule, when it comes to using this grid, is to place your subject on one of the intersecting points. So let's look at some examples. Okay, I'm going to go through this as quickly as I can, but I do want to make sure that you know to apply this to videos as well as to photos. So although I'm showing you all photos here, that's just because it's easier, but you can apply this and you should apply it to your videos as well. So here we have the grid over the top of this image, and as you can see, this girl is on this third and her eyes are on the top third, which makes for a great composition. So when I take the grid off, you can see this looks really nice, and you can see this background kind of, you flip over and then you flip back to her, and it just gives that nice sense of spaciousness and balance. If I go to this picture right here, again, she's placed on, let me bring the grid up, she's placed on this third and this third right here, so this is really nice composition wise, and she's looking into the city, so you can see where she's looking into, which is really important. If, let me demonstrate here, if I were to move this image over here, for example, and then there was all this space behind her, it would look very odd and very kind of off balance, like she's about to tip off the edge of the image, and you can't see where she's looking into. So it's really important that you keep her in the correct position, which I had about right here, so that you can see where it is that she's looking into, and that provides for a really nice composition. Here we have a close-up. So this is a girl who is mainly on this third and her eyes are on the upper third. So typically you're going to have the eyes on the upper third most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time. And if you were to use this as an example of maybe teaching to video image, because often this would be the sort of composition you might have for your videos, then this would be a great way to do it, just having you slightly off to the side, not right in the center. And then having something to balance that off in this area, something in the background. Obviously, she's got her elbow in the way, but something in the background would look really nice there. Something very subtle, not very distracting. So the focus is here, and that would make for a great composition for your videos as well. Here we have this girl, and she is looking into the image. So again, this is a good composition in terms of having all that space where she's looking into and you can see it. With this in the background, it looks really nice. So you go over here to look at the background and you come back to her as the main subject. And if you look at the thirds, she's on this third and basically coming down into this area right here. So a little bit of this line here. And the next one here, I wanted to show you, maybe not so much with the grid on top, I just wanted to point out that the photographer who took this, I got all these photos off Pexels, which is a free site for getting photos. You can see up the top here, they've chopped off the top of her head, which I don't actually think is a really good thing in this case, because there's all this space down here, and they just chopped off that little bit. So I think it's okay to chop off the top of your head if you're quite zoomed in. In this case, they're not, and I didn't think this was well done. So I just wanted to point out to avoid this kind of thing here. But apart from that, it's actually really nice. You've got this foreground image on this side, and you've got these really interesting steps. So if I were to recompose this, let's bring it in and actually put it somewhere along those lines. So I think this is a much nicer shot. You've got enough of a base down here to feel like she's got a base, I can't think of the word, and it doesn't matter so much that the top is cut off now. You may want to move it up just a little bit potentially. I'm moving the wrong thing here. Like that, just to make it maybe feel like it was more of an intentional thing rather than just the top cut off. But if I put the grid on now, you can see that she's on this third and the eyes are just above this third, and actually that makes, I think, for a much nicer composition. And again, if you were doing a video and talking to camera, having you on the third like this, and then having something like this in your background, maybe related to your branding or to your topic or something along those lines, then that would all be really nice and in keeping. Now this one, she's right bang in the center of the image. So if I turn the grid on, you can see right bang in the center, her eyes are slightly above the third, and actually it doesn't look like a really great composition. She's framed by the trees, which I guess is something, but personally I don't like this composition. What I would do is zoom in again, because obviously I can only work with what I've got here. And I would probably go into about there, and if I turn on the grids, we might pull her eyes up a little bit. So now she's on this third with eyes on here. She's got this space to look into, and if I take the grid off, it actually, I think, looks much more interesting. You're actually wondering, what is she thinking about? What is she seeing? And that makes for, I think, much nicer composition than the first one. I like this one, even though there's not that much space over here. So if I go to here, for example, she is mainly on this side, so she's a little bit further to the right than on this third. But we don't need a lot of space behind here. She's on this third here, most of it. And that's, I guess, where the focus is. You could potentially add a little bit more space, but actually I don't think it's necessary. I like the fact that there's so much space in front, because it gives that sense of openness and spaciousness that the ocean kind of communicates. So I think this is a really nice composition. And finally, this one. So I don't think this is a great composition either. You've got this man right bang in the center of the image. Let's bring this up. So he's right bang in the middle. His eyes are on the right level here. But the image in general, I don't think actually, it looks very static, as we talked about. Yes, you've got the cars here, but what's all this extra space? What's that needed for? So what I would do with this one is pull this out. And bring this guy up here. Now that's probably more the composition that I would choose. And turning the grid on, so his eyes are a little bit low maybe. So if I bring that up a little bit, there you go. So you've got the eyes on the third, you've got him on that third. And if I take this off, you've now got a really nice composition, I think. You've got the interest of the cars and the buildings here, but you haven't got a huge amount of space behind him. You've got the room for him to look into, and it feels really balanced and interesting. And again, you're kind of wondering what it is he's looking at. So those are some ideas of just how to use the rule of thirds. And you basically want to keep your eyes generally on this third up here, and then put your body on one of these sides here in general. If you're doing things with horizons, then it's good to have the horizons up here or down here rather than in the center, because it adds more interest that way. Probably horizons aren't going to be a big deal unless you're taking photos and stuff like that, but certainly if you're doing videos where you're talking to camera and you want to be on one of the thirds, it just adds a little bit more interest, and you can put something else in your background. Of course, having talked about the rule, there are occasions when you might want to break that rule. However, knowing what the rule is in the first place and why you're breaking it is important. Okay, let me know in the description below whether you like the look of the rule of thirds or maybe you don't. And if you like this video, please hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos related to creating your online courses using video. Stay creative, and we will talk soon.